Over the past few lessons, we've went over the software creation process. And in this video, I'd like to show you how we can put it all together by creating a simple application. So let's say that you're the new awesome Java developer in town, and XYZ company contacts you, sending you this thrilling email about a new job. It says, "Hey awesome Java dev, this is John at XYZ Inc., and we're looking for someone who can whip us up a Java-based message board, which allows us to manage users and their messages. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just create users, post messages, and view them. We'll take what you create and give it to our UI whiz, who will string everything together and make it look pretty. We're hoping you can get started right away. Sincerely, John." So awesome, we got a job. And we have all of the requirements of the application right here in the email. We just need to pick out some candidates for classes that we can use in the application. So just by looking at the nouns within this email message, I've come up with our candidate classes. We have a user class to model the users, a message class to create the messages, and a message board class, which will store the messages and print them out along with the user who posted the message. Now in this case, none of these classes overlap in functionality or behavior. So I think it is safe to say that we do need to create a class for each one of these candidates. Now that we've identified our classes, let's create some CRC cards to identify each class's responsibility and possible collaborators. And here I am in Firefox. So I'm going to be using a program called Visual Paradigm to create virtual CRC cards. If you'd like to try this out, you can get it at their website. It's visual-paradigm.com. And I'm on their downloads page, and you can download it for a free trial. Now I would suggest that you create your CRC cards using actual index cards, as it's much easier to work with in a hands-on fashion. But in order to show you how to do this on my computer, I'm going to use this program. So here I am in Visual Paradigm. To start off, I'm going to create a new CRC card diagram. I can do that just by clicking CRC card diagram and choosing to create a new one. And now let's create a new card for each class that we need. So we need a card for the user class, a card for the message class, and a card for the message board class. So to create a card, I can just click this little card icon here and then click into the middle. And I'll give it a name. So this one's for the user class. And let me position this up here in the top left. And I'll create another one. This one's going to be for the message class. And I'll put this one right next to the user class. And then we'll create the third one here. And this is for the message board class. And I'll put this one here as well. So here's our three cards representing our three classes. Now we need to think about what each class's responsibility is. Let's start with the user card on the left. So a user class should be responsible for creating a user. Let's write that responsibility down on the left side of the card. To add a responsibility in this program, you can just right-click here, choose Add, and add responsibility, and then just double-click into this bottom section here to type it in. So the user class's responsibility is to create users. And that's it for the user card. Now for a message, its responsibility is to create a message. So let's write its responsibility down. And now when creating a message, it's also going to need to use the user class in order to link the message to the user who's posting the message. So this responsibility has the user class as a collaborator. So let's put that on the right side of the card. And that completes the message card or the message class. Let's now move on to the message board class. Now its responsibility is to add messages onto the board and then display those messages. So let's add both of those responsibilities here. The first one is to add messages onto the board, and then the second one is to display the messages. Now this message board class is going to have to collaborate with the message class in order to display the messages. So let's write the message class down as a collaborator on the right. And I think that does it. We have our three different cards for our three classes. We have their responsibilities, and we have their collaborators. So you can save this diagram for later use to refer back to it if you'd like. But now that we've identified what classes we need, their responsibilities, and their collaborators, let's now create a UML diagram which we can use to visually see our program structure and the relationships between our classes. To do this, I'm going to use another program which is free called Argo UML. And here I am back in Firefox, and I'm at Argo UML's website. You can find this page by going to argouml-downloads.tigris or tigris.org. And it's pretty easy to install, so you can just download it and then come back once you're ready to continue. Alright, so here I am in Argo UML. Now we'll be able to use this program to create a UML diagram of our application. To get started, we need to create a box for each one of our classes. So we need one for the user class, one for the message class, and one for the message board class. Now, the really cool thing about Argo UML is that you can have it generate your Java files for you based off of your diagram. And even better is if you also define your class's instance variables and methods, those will be generated as well, saving you a lot of time. Then all you have to do is a little cleanup and give your methods some instructions. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do. Let's start with the user class. If you click this little box here to create a new class and then click into the main section, it creates your square for you. And to give your box its class name, you just click into the top section here. Well, double click into it. And then we can type our class name. So this one's for the user class. And now to give your class some instance variables, you just double click into the second section of the box. And you can see here that we can specify a new attribute, as they call it, but you can just think of this as your instance variable or your property. So on the left side goes the property's name, and on the right is the property's type. And they're just separated here by a colon. So we need a property to hold the user's name. So I'm going to change the name of this property to be name. And I'm going to change its type to use the string type. And when finished, you can just hit enter. And now we also want to make sure that this property is private. So we can click this little private bubble down here in the properties panel, and that'll change it to private for us. Now let's create a couple of methods for the user class. To create a method, we can just double click into the bottom section of our user class box. And you can see that this is going to create a new operation, but you can just think of that as a new method. We first need to create our user constructor. So I'm going to name my method user with a capital U, just like our user class name. And then inside of parentheses, we can tell it if it needs to accept any parameters, but we don't need to include the type of the method parameter. We'll give the type when we edit these files inside of Eclipse. So for now, we're just going to give the method variables a name. So when we create a user, we want to be able to pass the name right into the constructor. So I'm just going to use the letter N, short for name. And that's it for the user constructor. We can just hit enter. Now let's also create another method that we can use to retrieve the name of the user. To create another method, we can just select our user class box, and then when you hover over the bottom section here, you can see this little plus sign. This bottom plus sign will create a new method, and the top plus sign will create a new attribute or property. So let's click this bottom plus sign, and I'm going to name this method getName. We'll open up our parentheses for our parameters, but we don't need any parameters for this method. Then we can put a space and a colon and another space, and we can specify the method's return type. So this is just going to be returning back the name, which is a string. And that completes our user class, its instance variable, and both of its methods. Let's now do the same thing for the message class. So let's create another class box here. We'll double click into the top to give it a name of message. Then we can double click into the middle section to create our instance variables. The first one I'm going to name as user, and this is going to hold an actual user object so that we can link the message to the user who's posting the message. And we'll change its type to use our user class. And I'll hit enter, and let's make this a private instance variable. Now let's create another one. So we can hover over here and click the top plus sign. And now the second instance variable is going to be used to hold the content of the message. So I'm just going to name it content, and I'll change its type to be string. We'll hit enter, and make sure to select it again after hitting enter if it didn't get selected. and let's change it to private. Now let's create our message classes methods. We first need our message constructor, so we can double-click into the bottom section of the class box. And I'm just going to name this message using a capital M, the same as our message class. And we'll open up our parentheses, and this method's going to need to accept two parameters. The first one is going to be the user who's posting the message, so I'm just going to name it you. And the second one is going to be the actual message itself, so I'm just going to use the letter M. We'll close our parentheses and hit enter. And now we need to create one more method, a getMessage method, so that we can retrieve the message and who posted the message. So let's create another method here. There we go. And I'm going to name this getMessage. And it doesn't need to accept any parameters, but we'll put a space and a colon and another space, and we'll specify its return type. So this is just going to be returning back a string. And that completes the message class. Now let's do the same thing for the message board class. Let's create another class box here. We'll double click into the top of the box to give it a name. So this is the message board class. And this is going to need one instance variable or property. And this is going to hold all of the messages for the message board. So I'm going to give this a name of messages. And now for its type, we're going to use the array list. And this is going to be an array list of message objects. So we'll be able to store as many new message objects as we'd like into our messages array list. So we can just hit enter and then make sure to mark it as private down here. Now our message board class is going to need a few methods, so let's add a new method. The first one is going to be the message board constructor, and it's not going to need to accept any parameters. So we can just name it the same as our class, and we'll hit enter. And let's create another method. And this one's going to be used to post a new message to the board. So I'm going to name this method post. And it's going to need to accept one parameter, which is the actual message object that should be posted to the board. So I'm just going to use the letter M for short. And we'll hit enter. And let's create another method. And this method's going to be used to loop through all of our messages in the messages array list and return them back, and we can then display them in the console. So I'm going to name this method display, and it's not going to need to accept any parameters, but we will need to set its return type. This is going to be returning back a string, so we'll set it to string and hit enter. And that completes our three classes with their instance variables and their methods. Now we just need to define our relationships. So we already know our relationships essentially because we defined the collaborators when we created our CRC cards. So here I am back in Visual Paradigm, and we can see that a message collaborates with a user and a message board collaborates with a message. So let's go back into Argo UML. And now we just need to pick the proper relationship to model that relationship here in Argo UML. So for this program, we aren't using any inheritance. We don't have any super or subclasses here. So we won't be needing the generalization or the is a relationship, nor do we have any interfaces. So we won't be using a realization relationship either. But we will be using the aggregation relationship. Since our message class here has a user instance variable, and we'll be using that user object to call its getName method, you may think that we need to use both the aggregation and a dependency relationship notation. But in this situation, we only need to use the aggregation notation because aggregation already implies dependency, so there's no need to use both relationship notations. And the same thing goes for the aggregation and dependency between the message board and a message. Our message board will be using an array list of message objects, and we'll be calling the message class's getMessage method. So we need to, again, only set up an aggregation relationship, as this also implies dependency. To set up the aggregation relationship, we can use the aggregation tool here. So if you hover over it, you'll see that it says new aggregation, and then we can just draw from the message class to the user class. And that sets up its aggregation relationship. Then we can click the aggregation tool once more, and we can draw from the message board class to the message class, and that sets up its relationship. Now, I mentioned that we'll be able to use Argo UML to generate our Java files for us based off of our diagram. We can preview the Java source code that's going to be generated. To do that, we can just click one of our classes here and choose the source tab down here at the bottom. And we're getting this little error here because it's trying to display source code for SQL, but we're not going to be using that. So I'm just going to close the error out. And from the drop-down box, let's choose Java. And here's the preview of the Java code that we'll get if we would try to generate the Java files from our current diagram. Now you'll notice something strange about this. We have this import java.util.vector and this new property here of a vector type named myMessage. The reason this is popping up is because of our aggregation relationships. You'll see both of these inside of our other two classes as well. So Argo UML is helpfully trying to insert a new property and import the correct class to represent our aggregation relationships, but we don't want it to do that. We want to make sure that it doesn't insert anything that we don't want. Now, I found a way to get around this. You can just click the relationship itself, and that's going to bring up a new tab here down in the bottom, the Properties tab. And to get around it, we can just click this Is Abstract checkbox. Let's do the same thing for the other one over here. And this time, if we click our class box and go back to the source tab, you can see that it's removed that import statement and it's gotten rid of that second property that it was inserting. And now we have the proper code to be generated when we generate our files. And that's it. So with our beautiful UML diagram, we're now able to clearly see what's going to be built. Let's now use Argo UML to generate our Java files for us. We can go up to Generation and choose Generate All Classes. So down here in the box, you can see our three classes, and you can see the different languages that you can have Argo UML generate source files for. We're only interested with the Java column. So let's check all three of these boxes to create a Java file for each one of our classes. And then down here in the output directory, we need to tell it where to generate our files at. Let's click the Browse button, and we'll navigate into our Java folder, into our Intro to CS Java project, then into the source folder, and then into the Intro to CS Java package. And now inside of here, at the top, we can tell this to, when it generates our files, to insert those into a new package. So we're going to have this go into a new package named dev process. And we can just hit choose and double check that you have Java checked here for all three of the classes, and we'll hit generate. Now let's switch into Eclipse and check out the files that were generated. And here I am in Eclipse. Now if we look in the Package Explorer, you can see that we don't see anything about our new dev process package. To get that to show up, we can just right-click our Intro to CS Java project, and we can choose Refresh. Now the dev process package shows up, and we can look inside of it, and there's our three classes. Now we do have a little cleanup to do. As you can see, there's a couple of errors. So let's start with the user class first. And so you can see that it did a pretty good job of giving us the basic code that we need to get the application up and running. But let's just clean this up first and fix some of the errors. At the top, let's make sure to declare the package for this class. So we'll use the package keyword, and that's in our Intro to CS package, and then into the new dev process package. And for our user constructor, we don't need the void return type, so we'll get rid of that. And we need to give our n parameter variable a type. So this is just going to be taking in a string for the user's name. So we'll set its type to string. And now inside of our constructor, we just need to initialize our name instance variable with the name that's being passed in from the constructor. Now let's add a comment for this method at the top. We can add a comment just by using a / and 2 asterisks and then hitting enter. And that creates this java.comment template for us. So let's just put a description about what this method's supposed to do. This just constructs a new user. And then we'll give a little description for our n parameter variable. And this is just the user's name. Now let's fix up our getName method. I'm going to change the indentation here. And instead of returning null, let's have this return the name instance variable's value. Let's also add a comment here. And this method's just going to be getting the user's name, and this is going to be returning the user's name as well. So we can save the file, and now we'll be able to use this class to create a new user and get the user's name. Let's now fix up our message class. Let's start at the top by declaring the class's package. We'll use the package keyword, and this goes into the intro to CS package, and then our dev process package. And once more, I'm going to get rid of this extra space that they inserted here. And let's get rid of the void return type for our message constructor. And let's now set our types for our parameter variables. So the first one is accepting an actual user object. So we'll set its type to user with a capital U. And our second one is the actual message. And that's just going to be a string. So we'll set its type to string. Now inside of our constructor, let's just initialize our instance variables to use what was passed in when the message is being created. So we'll set the user instance variable equal to the user that's being passed into the constructor, and we'll do the same thing for the content instance variable. We'll just set that equal to the message that's being passed in. Let's now also give this method a comment. So this is just constructing a new message. And the U parameter variable is the user, and the M parameter variable is the message. Now let's fix up the getMessage method. I'm just going to get rid of the return statement here to start with. And what this method is going to do is just return back the message itself plus the name of the user who posted the message. So I'm going to create a local variable. It's going to be of a string type, and I'm going to name it message. And this is going to hold the message itself. So we'll use our content instance variable, and then I'm going to concatenate a string onto this. So we'll put a space and a hyphen and another space, and then the words by. Then I'll put a colon and a space. And so this will separate the content of the message from the name of the user who's posting the message. Now let's just concatenate on the user's name. So we can use our user object and call its getName method. And then I'm going to concatenate a new line escape character onto the end of this. To do that, we just use a backslash and the letter N. The reason I'm doing this is that way, after each message, it'll force a new line after it, forcing the next message down onto the next line. And now we just need to make sure to return our message. Now let's give this method a comment. So this method just gets the message, and it's also returning the message. Let's save the file, and we'll now be able to use this class in combination with our user class to create a message. Now we need to fix up the message board class. At the top, let's start by declaring its package. That's the intro to CS package, and then our dev process package. We also need to import the array list so that we can use it here for our messages instance variable. So we use import, and that's under java.util, and it's named ArrayList. I'm again going to get rid of this extra space here. And for our message board constructor, let's get rid of the void return type. And inside of the constructor, we need to initialize our messages instance variable to be a new empty array list of message objects. Let's now give this constructor a comment. So this just constructs a new message board. Now let's fix up our post method. So this post method is going to be accepting an actual message object. So we need to give our M parameter variable a type. So this is going to use message with a capital M. And now inside of our method, we just need to take the message and stick it into our messages array list. We can do this by using our messages array list and calling its add method and just passing in the message. Let's give this method a comment. And this is just posting a new message. And the M parameter variable is just the message itself. And now we'll fix up the display method. I'll start by just getting rid of the return statement. And this method's going to loop through all of our messages and then just return back a string containing all of the messages. So we're going to need a variable that we can use to just concatenate each message into a string. And I also want it to start with an initial message heading, welcoming them to the message board. So let's create that variable. It's going to be of a string type, and I'm going to name it the messages. And this is going to hold a default welcome message. So this is just going to say, welcome to the message board. Now I'm also going to add 2 new line breaks to the end of this string. That way it separates our message heading from the other messages, which will concatenate onto this string. Then we'll end here with a semicolon. And now let's create our loop to loop over all of our messages. We'll set our I variable equal to 0. Then our condition will be while I is less than the size of our messages array list. And then we'll just increment I. And now inside of our loop, we can take the messages variable and we'll give it a new value. So it's going to hold its current value, the messages, which is our current heading, and then we'll concatenate each message onto this string. We can use our messages array list. We'll call its get method. We can pass in our I variable as the index, and this is going to give us back a message object. We'll then be able to call the message object's getMessage method. So this will create one big string with our heading, then 2 line breaks, plus each message broken down onto its own line. Now outside of our loop, we just need to return the messages variable so that it returns our string. And we'll be able to use its return value to print out all of the messages to the console. Let's now give this method a comment. And this just displays all of the messages. And it's returning all of the messages. And with that, that completes our program. Now we just need a tester class to ensure that it works. So let's create a new class. I'm going to name this message board tester. And this is going to go into the intro to CS package and then into the dev process package. And make sure to check the checkbox here to create your main method, and we'll hit finish. Now inside of the main method, I'm just going to change the comment to say testing the message board. And let's first create our message board object to hold all of our messages. We start with its type of message board. I'm just going to give it a name of board, and we'll call our message board constructor. Now we just need a few users to post some messages. So we start with its type of user. I'm going to name it Andrew, and we'll create a new user. And I'll just pass in a string here as my name of Andrew. And then we'll create a second user named Jane, and we'll pass in her name as well. Now let's create a couple of messages. So I'll name the first one M1, just for message 1. We'll call our message constructor, and we need to pass in the user object who's posting the message. So we'll use Andrew for the first one, and then we can just pass in a string for the message itself. So I'm going to say, hey Jane, how are you doing? And then let's create a second message, and we'll have Jane post this one. And her message is just going to say, I'm doing good. Thanks for asking. Now let's insert our messages into the message board. So we can use our board object, and we'll call its post method, and we'll post message 1. Then we can just duplicate this, and we can post message 2. And finally, let's use system.out.println, and we'll call our board objects display method to display all of our messages to the console. Let's save the file, and we'll run the program. And perfect, you can see that we get our welcome heading at the top, then we get both of our messages, and we also get the name of the user who posted the message. So now we know that our application is working as expected, and the implementation and testing phases are done. Now, you may want to try writing some unit tests for your application if you'd like for some additional practice. JUnit tests were covered in the first Java 101 course if you need a refresher. The last thing we need to do is create some documentation for our application. The great thing about using Eclipse and creating Java doc comments like we did for all of our methods is that we can use all of these comments that we wrote and have Eclipse generate HTML and CSS documentation based off of those comments for us. To do that, we can go to Project and choose Generate Java Doc. Now you'll want to make sure to uncheck this checkbox beside our Intro to CS Java project. Otherwise, it'll generate documentation for everything inside of the project. So once that's unchecked, we can click this little arrow. And here's our source folder. We can then click the arrow beside it. And here's all of our packages. And now we can check the checkbox beside our dev process package. And that'll generate documentation only for the files inside of the dev process package. Now down here in the destination field is where the documentation is going to be generated at. So it's just going into the Java folder, then into the Intro to CS project, and it's going to stick it inside of a new folder called doc. So if you want it to go somewhere else, you can just browse to a new location, but I'm going to leave it here, and we can hit finish. And you can see that it's now generating those files, and it's already complete. So let's go ahead and take a look at the files that were created. Here I am in my Finder, so we can just go into Java, into our Intro to CS Java project, and here's our doc folder that was just created, along with all of our HTML files for our documentation. And to view them, here's the index.html file. We can just right-click this and choose to open it up in Firefox. And here's our lovely documentation. So you can see that we have all 4 of our classes here. And we can click on them to view them. We can also select them over here on the left. So let's take a look at, how about the message board class? And you can see that we have all kinds of documentation. We have documentation for the package. We have a constructor summary with descriptions. We have our method summary with descriptions. We have constructor details and method details. So feel free to look at the other classes and take a look at all of the documentation. But with that, we are finally finished. So I hope you found all of this helpful in seeing how to put the software creation process into practice. We went from reviewing the application's requirements, to identifying classes and using CRC cards, to creating a UML diagram, to implementing the application, to testing it out, and finally creating documentation. But that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next lesson.